Good morning and welcome to this morning's devotional. This morning we are going to look at Psalm 71. And in this particular psalm, the general overview is that this psalmist is looking at his life and from his youth to the present time into the future. And he knows that as he grows old and gray and he starts to weaken, that maybe his enemies will sniff that out and will try to do something about it. And so he is reaching out to God and asking for him to help him even as he enters into that eventual stage of life. But what I want to do is I want to focus in on a couple verses here. So if you have your Bibles, turn to we're going to look at verses 14 through 18. It says this: "As for me, I will always have hope. I will praise you more and more. My mouth will tell of your righteous deeds, of your saving acts all day long. Though I know not how to relate to them all, I will come and proclaim your mighty acts, sovereign Lord. I will proclaim your righteous deeds, yours alone. Since my youth, God, you have taught me. And to this day I declare your marvelous deeds. Even when I am old and gray, do not forsake me, my God, till I declare your power to the next generation, your mighty acts to all who are to come." And so in those particular verses, I'm sure you might have picked up the emphasis that I put on the words, but he uses words like my mouth will tell, I will proclaim, I declare, and I declare. And so what we see the psalmist doing here is that he is acting as though he is a siren that won't be silent. And so sometimes in our lives when we go to talk about God, there's moments where we remain silent. We kind of keep that to ourselves. We remain personal with that and keep that private. But not this psalmist. This psalmist is, gung-ho about proclaiming and declaring who God is to all those around him. He says, till I proclaim your power to the next generation, that he knows that there are youth coming up who need to hear about who God is and understand his mighty works. And so, it reminds me of a little bit of a time when I was a teenager and I was into this, certain kind of music. And I remember this song had come on the internet at the time, and I was so excited about it. And there was a friend of mine who and I shared this favorite band. And I was so desperate to tell him about this song that I ran 2 blocks to his house as fast as I could. And I banged on his door and I was like, "Wally, you've got to hear this song." And if I'm doing that with just a song, well, what about all the things that God has done? Think about the apostles in Acts when they are, told to be silent about Jesus. They said, no, we cannot help but talk about the things that we have seen and we have heard. But what about you? What is a practical takeaway from a psalm like this? I would say this: we, as Christians, we should not remain silent about what God has done in our lives. If we truly believe this like supernatural, amazing, eternal thing has happened, that is something you probably don't want to stay silent about. I know some of you might not be as big a talkers, and some of you might, like me, talk a little bit too much. But I want to give you kind of just 2 real quick things. And this is what I kind of share with students sometimes. The first is just to crack the door. And so if you're in a conversation with somebody and they say, "Hey, what did you do this weekend?" You could just say, "I went to church," if you indeed went to church. Or, "What do you do in your free time?" You could say, like, I'm part of a Bible study. I'm in a small group. And so those are like little ways of which you can be subtle about, like, hey, this is who I am. This is a part of who I am and what I do. The next one, though, is something that I can do from time to time is, I usually say to students, if someone cracks the door, kick it in. I remember one time I was getting my hair cut at a barbershop, and the barber asked me, he said, "Well, what do you do for a living?" I said, "Well, I am a youth pastor and I work with students in a church." And then he asked the question, "How did you get that job?" And that is a moment of which he cracked the door and I kicked it in. And I told him about how Jesus changed my life, and I told him about the ways of which I was to who I am now, and all the ways that God's continuing to work in my life. And so, in moments like that, if someone says, "How do you get through when you go through a tough time?" You could just say, God strengthens me. My church comes around me. To look at moments where if someone just asks you a basic question, you can, crack the door. Just say some simple, subtle things. But if someone cracks the door and you feel like it, maybe kick it in. And to share and declare and proclaim who God is. To not be silent, but to be like this psalmist and to be a siren for God. Thanks for being with me this morning. Have a blessed day.